In the past decade, Hollywood has gone to lengths to embrace socially progressive values, from casting more folks of different ethnicities to putting LGBTQ relationships front and center. And as we know, those decisions have come at a price. But if you're able to escape the echo chamber of racist, purists who insist that their childhoods have been ruined because their favourite fictional character has the wrong skin colour, you'll discover that Hollywood has done a decent job championing diversity. For the sake of time and digestibility, I'll focus on racial diversity. Let's start by acknowledging how far Hollywood has come. I'm tempted to skip the early era. You know, the one in which white folks didn't just dress up as swashbucklers, they also dressed up as minorities. But let's not gloss over everything that's uncomfortable. On the off chance that a minority actor was allowed to act in front of a camera, they were tasked to play unflattering roles. If the character wasn't dim-witted or a devious temptress, they would be so virtuous or exotic that they couldn't possibly fall in love with a white person. Oftentimes, they just didn't have much to do except to assist the white protagonist with their problems. Minorities had no choice but to tolerate these demeaning distortions of their identity because they had little say in life, let alone the film industry. These early shows were made to entertain white people and justify their prejudiced attitudes towards those who didn't look like them. Thankfully, as society grew savvier and more cosmopolitan, people's taste and sensibilities changed, and so did Hollywood. The 80s and 90s weren't afraid to feature black and Hispanic actors in starring roles. Asians and other minority groups got smaller slices of the Hollywood pie. But the bottom line is that minority characters couldn't be treated with zero regard anymore. Because the stakes are different when you know that the Martin Castillo in your script is being played by someone with Latino roots and not a white guy with a fake tan. This was the era in which Hollywood cared less about where you came from and more about whether you could draw audiences in. None of this meant that racism had been expunged from Hollywood. Far from it. Racism had merely become more discreet. The white savior concept, which had persisted for years, successfully trained moviegoers around the world to expect to see Caucasians as protagonists and heroes in Western productions, so the bulk of roles went to and still goes to white people. Aside from fighting to get noticed in Hollywood, minorities also had to contend with inferior roles. While the stigma of hiring and casting minorities had diminished, most entertainment executives were mainly born and raised white Americans who were compelled to write and produce stories that revolved around their own lives and culture. So it was just easier to exclude characters and experiences they weren't comfortable depicting. Even the most popular shows which we associate with specific communities were written by white folks.
Oh.
The lack of representation behind the scenes naturally led to another problem. The actors that ended up on screen often found themselves playing up racial stereotypes, not unlike their predecessors, because such quirks were apparently what made those shows accessible to general audiences. Over the last 20 years, the industry has matured further. There are many more decision makers in Hollywood who are women or from different cultures and sexual orientation. And these folks are trying to tell stories in a way that honors their lived experiences. In a perfect world, representation in entertainment should just be a thing in the background, something you don't bother discussing, like the credits. But reality, as we all know, is complicated. On one end of the spectrum, we have shows being led by minorities, with people in front and behind the camera who share the same vision for the project. But are we unwittingly transmitting the wrong message when most of the show is racially homogeneous? Are we saying that minorities are only allowed to shine and be true to themselves if they remain within the confines of their own community. At the other end of the spectrum, we have Bridgerton, which romanticizes the early 1800s with its polite depictions of race relations. The alternative historical setting might seem harmless enough, and maybe it is. But if brushing off the horrors of our past becomes routine, we might forget the lessons of history and repeat them, as cliché as it sounds. The rest of the Hollywood landscape is peppered with what most people would consider to be positive examples of representation. Lovecraft Country pushed back on the trope that gay black men had to be flamboyant queens. Asian males can finally play sports instead of with calculators. Latinos don't have to be cops or criminals in the justice system. Some people feel that these attempts at inclusivity are being shoehorned where they aren't needed because they're too idealistic and don't mirror real life. But other viewers derive joy and inspiration from these representations because they reveal a utopia that is within reach. Everybody's opinion is valid. The problem is when these differences in opinion manifest as raging online wars that catch the attention of the people financing Hollywood. The worst thing that can happen is that these people start believing that the only reason their racially inclusive shows could be faring poorly is because the shows are racially inclusive. When in truth, the reason shows fail haven't changed. Poor marketing, poor story, poor production. Take your pick. If Hollywood gets cold feet about diversity, we'll regress to a time when the default protagonist for every movie is whichever white dude is the new Harrison Ford. Obviously, I'm kidding. We can't phase out white guys from lead roles, otherwise David Fincher wouldn't know what to do. I'm saying it's in everyone's best interest that Hollywood continues its momentum of investing in productions that value representation, because we're on the precipice of what I call peak representation. Think of it like this. If a character in your horror film is the first to die or the only one to survive, and your viewers never mention said character's race as the reason for either outcome, you've achieved peak representation. Peak representation also means that we're all okay if the reboot of Friends features an all-white cast again. All this can only happen when storytellers aren't compelled to bend to the demands of flaky online mobs and the suits with the money, so they're free to create the stories they want. If our hypothetical storytellers aren't bigots, we can expect to see every kind of story being told, matched by every kind of casting permutation, limited only by the pool of talents in the industry. Eventually, we'll all come to understand that story is king. It's the only thing that matters. So an actor's immutable traits are only relevant if they impede the story. We're seeing many fantastic examples of peak representation, all released in the last 2 years, but I want to zoom in on just one. It's the HBO series The Last of Us. As many of you probably know, the show is based on the video game of the same name. You spend most of the game's roughly 15 hours of playtime in the boots of Joel Miller. The game is so immersive that you feel the emotional burden of every action that Joel undertakes. It's considered one of the best games of all time for a reason. With that said, and knowing that video gamers can be a rabid bunch, the choice to cast a Latino to play the lead role of Joel Miller could have been disastrous. Because by the end of the game, you can't imagine Joel being anything other than a gruff, middle-aged white man from Texas. But barely anyone complained about Pedro Pascal getting the part, even though he's of Chilean descent. And that's because he embodies Joel Miller in every way that's meaningful. I mean, he was this guy from Game of Thrones. What did you expect? You'd have to be a special kind of racist to object to Pedro Pascal. Now, if they had cast Wilmer Valderrama, we'd have a problem. But wait, there's more to like about the casting. The producers gave the role of Tommy, Joel's younger brother, to Gabriel Luna, a Mexican American. Yes, so we essentially have two Latinos playing two Caucasians. Now, if you're on Team Latino and celebrating, you better also be good with one final detail, which is that the Miller brothers work in construction, arguably mainstream media's most stereotyped career choice for South Americans. I love these subversive decisions from the producers because they make us confront the reality that representation done in good faith can still be messy, especially when it's trying to serve the story. We also have to recognize that there are so many cultures waiting to be represented and so many ways in which to do it, that it will take a while for Hollywood to nail the process consistently. In the meantime, we should keep communicating problematic instances of representation, but avoid getting too worked up over the missteps. If the last century of film and TV is any indication of Hollywood's capacity for progress, we have little to worry about. And that's it from me. As always, thank you for watching.